Hello and welcome back to On The Grid Podcast, Season 4, Episode 25. Now, we are back with another episode during this summer break. Not long to go now. At the time of recording, we've still got a couple of weeks, but as you're hearing this, there'll be just over a week to go. Joining with me, as ever, is my co-host, Adrian. How are you today? You looking forward to F1 being back?
Yeah, it's like you said. It's been a bit of a break now. I'm getting bored, but I mean, football's back on. The Olympics have just happened. The Paralympics are kicking off. So yeah, it's an exciting time for sport, but I just can't wait for the F1 season to be back and to seeing all of those 20 drivers back in action once again.
So we'll get into things. We have our 1 to 10 driver ratings at just over halfway stage, but in the mid-season review. So we'll kick things off. And in first place is Oliver Bearman with an average rating of 10 out of 10. So obviously we'll get Ollie Bearman out the way first. We won't count him towards the actual standings because he's only driven one race. And that was a 10 out of 10. So otherwise, he would be first by quite a distance as well. So had that fantastic performance in Jeddah. We're going to see him next season. How excited are you seeing Ollie Bearman and seeing what he can do in 2025?
Yeah, it's an exciting time for kind of British motorsport because it's the first time I believe there's four drivers on the grid since the mid 2010s, I want to say. So it's an exciting time for British motorsport, and it's an exciting time for Ollie Bearman. Like you say, he had that fantastic performance in Jeddah where he finished up inside the points. I think he finished seventh, I want to say, if I'm not mistaken. I think he got 6 points or 4 points. It's either seventh or eighth. It's one of the two. Pretty sure he finished up ahead Nico Hulkenberg and I think Yuki Tsunoda. So it was seventh or eighth. But regardless of that, finished well inside the points. Obviously not having a fantastic season in Formula Two so far. But I think it all goes down to his Formula One performance at Ferrari, and I think he's like you say, he's the Haas reserve driver, so a deserved step up for him. And yeah, looking forward to seeing how he fares alongside Esteban Ocon in that Haas next season.
So Ollie Bearman finished seventh in Jeddah and actually finished above Lando Norris and Lewis Hamilton. So that's how different the current grid was at that stage of the season. Lando Norris and Lewis Hamilton are actually in the top six. Both drivers in the top six of our average ratings. As a little spoiler ahead. So now we'll actually kick things off. And in P20 is Logan Sargent with an average rating of 4.42, cut adrift at the bottom of the leaderboard. So he has got 1 2 out of 10, 3 threes, 5 fours, 3 fives, and just the 1 8 out of 10. Obviously has one less grading than everybody else, but it's still an average rating based on those 13 as opposed to the 14s. Obviously missed Australia. Is there any surprise here?
Simple answer. Do you want a simple answer? Do you want a simple answer? I'll give you the simple answer, which is no. He's not cut for F1. He's last season, I think he was very fortunate to have his seat extended because he only got that 1 points finish in Austin, where it was kind of very lucky because both Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc were disqualified from that race. So he got propelled into the points. And it goes without saying, I think he's just in it because of his pull. Is He's an American driver. There's obviously three races in the US with Miami, with Austin, and with Las Vegas. So of course he pulls that F1 attraction for the American audience, but nothing else apart from that. He's arguably the worst driver I've seen in quite a few seasons, and that is with Lance Stroll being on the grid as well. So yeah, it's unfortunate because Logan Sargent had a very good rise from F3, from F2, and into F1, but I just don't think he's a cut. He's quite a way below the rest of the drivers in F1 at this moment in time. So yeah, deserved 20th place at the moment.
Yeah, so that 8 out of 10, the only grade above a 5.5 that he's got, which obviously at Silverstone when he finished 11th. And again, that is his only finishing position above 14th this season. So quite shocking from him. We'll move on now to 19th place and jumping up to a 5.04, so over half a mark higher, is Lance Stroll in 19th. So for Stroll, he's got two 1 out of 10s, two threes, a four, three fives, three sixes, 1 7, and two eights. So obviously the 1 out of 10s come in at Jeddah and then at China. So again, is there any surprise? I don't think so. I think he's picked up his form slightly, but he is not as for a driver who's in what is seventh or eighth season in an F1. He's not performing as such. He's up against Fernando Alonso, who's wiped the floor with him last season. Not been as comprehensive this season, but there are speculation that that's because the car is being sort of built completely around Stroll and his driving style, if you can call it that. But yeah, 19th place for Lance Stroll, and not a good return.
Yeah, I'm gonna be short and sweet. Because I think sometimes, don't get me wrong, we are a little bit overcritical of Lance Stroll, but you've got to be, especially when you're coming up against a two-time world champion and Fernando Alonso, who's constantly trying to put it in the points, constantly hustling and bustling that car, for a long way above where it should be. But yeah, Lance Stroll, that 1 out of 10 in Jeddah where he crashed into the wall after about 3, 4 laps. And then in China when he was not looking where he was going and kind of went into the back of Daniel Ricciardo. I think that just culminates and kind of shows what type of driver he is. Not paying attention whatsoever, and is just there because of his daddy's cash. So yeah, deserve a 19th place.
Moving on to 18th place and only slightly above. So Lance Stroll had a 5.04. 18th place with a 5.07 is Zhou Guanyu. So for Zhou, he's got two 3 out of 10s, four fours, four fives, two sixes, 1 7, and 1 8. Obviously had that 8 out of 10 in the first race in Bahrain, where he did finish 11th, so just outside the points. But since then, it's been quite a shocking season for Sauber's perspective. They've been absolutely nowhere. There's been pit stop drama galore. I think Zhou is, I think his time in F1 is limited. I don't see himself getting a seat for next year. I think he's had his chance. He's been unlucky at times, but at the end of the day, this season, particularly his qualifying, has been absolutely horrendous. He's only got out of Q1 on two occasions this season. And the amount of times he's started on the back row is unbelievable. He's been comprehensively beaten by Valtteri Bottas, and I'm not surprised to see him in 18th place one bit.
Don't get me wrong, I think Zhou Guanyu is a little bit unlucky, especially with a Sauber car not being that good at all. But it goes without saying, similarly to Logan Sargent, I just don't think he's anywhere near the level of the other drivers, purely on the basis that he's exactly the same example as Logan Sargent. Had a fantastic F2, F3, and F2 career, but just in F1, it's just not been good enough. And I think, like you've clearly pointed out there, his days in F1 are numbered, and I think he is likely to be on the exit after this season. But this season, compared to seasons before, it's just been not good. It's just been poor, absolutely awful. And yet again, I don't think Sauber are going to get any points with Zhou Guanyu. They're a lot more likely to get points with Valtteri Bottas, but Zhou Guanyu just not good enough this season, and he's probably going to be axed because of it.
Yep, and then moving on to 17th place is his teammate Valtteri Bottas, slightly higher on a 5.14. So Bottas has 1 3 out of 10, four fours, five fives, three sixes, and 1 8 out of 10. So not much at all between it, which is actually quite surprising. Because I would have said on the face of it that Valtteri Bottas has been a lot better than Zhou Guanyu. But maybe that is just a bit of a recency bias on it because he has been outscoring him over the last few races. Any shocks here?
No, I think it's kind of down to the ability of the car, and we know how bad the Sauber is. We've seen how bad the Sauber is. It's constantly at the back of the grid, with Zhou Guanyu, and it's just Valtteri Bottas just absolutely battling the hell out of that car because I don't know whether Sauber or should we say Audi ahead of 2026 are putting all eggs in one basket when it comes to developing their car for next season and then developing it more for 2026. But I just don't think they've done enough work ahead of this season to have a good enough car to even battle for points. Never mind battle for 15th, 16th place. I just think on the face of it, yeah, Valtteri Bottas has been a better performer than Joe Guan Yu in this first half of the season. But when you actually delve into it and look a little bit deeper, do you think that it's purely on the basis that he's had a few good races at the back end of the first half of the season? Because at the first half, if you can rewind the clock into Bahrain, into Saudi, etc., these guys were absolutely nowhere. And Valtteri Bottas has put up some good couple of races in the back end of the first half of the season to kind of propel his rating a little bit better than Zhou Guan Yu. But on the face of it, I think both the drivers are very subpar this season so far, and their car just kind of compounds the misery that they had so far in 2024.
Yeah, agreed. Moving on now to 16th place. So there is a bit of a gap between 16th and 17th and 16th. So there's a gap of 0.43 of a mark. And just for context, the next sort of five or six drivers going from 16th all the way up to 11th are separated by just zero point 0.5. So that's just a little bit of context that, those four in particular are cut adrift at the bottom. 16th place is Pierre Gasly. So Pierre has two 3 out of 10s, three 4s, three 5s, one 6, two 7s, and three 8 out of 10s. And I've got to say, again, I'm not too surprised about this. I think, if we done it in a couple of races' time, he might be slightly higher. He has had some bad luck, particularly when he had those two DNFs in a row at Silverstone and Hungary. And, at Silverstone, he didn't even race a lap, did he? He had to retire on the formation lap and come back into the pits. And then Hungary, I think he retired early as well. So it's been an unfortunate start to the season, but again, I don't think the drivers are too much to blame for that. I think both Gasly and Ocon have performed well to what they're working with. Because that Alpine, particularly the first half of the season, or sort of the first half of this 14 block segment, that has been shocking. And, the car has not been there at all, and they're deserving of much, much better. So it'll be interesting to see what they can do if that Alpine does continue to improve, because it has had a bit of an upturn in fortune. But yeah, they've been nowhere. So I'm not too surprised to see them in this bottom 10.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, really. I think Pierre Gasly has been slightly less virtuous than Esteban Ocon, purely on the basis, like you said, he's had them two DNFs back to back, and Esteban Ocon has been able to kind of rally on. But I think, like similarly to Sauber, they've not had the best car. Their car has gone completely backwards from fighting near the top of the midfield to fighting basically at the back of the grid. It just kind of shows the quality of car and quality of performance that both Alpine drivers have had to really battle with. But maybe they come back in the second half of the season and show us what the Alpine is actually worth. But they've had to do a lot of digging and a lot of kind of upgrading to get himself into a better state ahead of the second half of the season. But I'm like you said, I'm not really surprised that Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon have kind of been a little bit subpar so far this season because yeah, their car's been nowhere, and it's not the driver's fault. It's purely down to the car, I think.
So speaking of Alpine, his teammate Esteban Ocon is in 15th. So a small jump up to 5.68, so 0.11. And now Ocon is actually tied with the next driver up in 14th place. But because the other driver has higher ratings, higher individual ratings, Ocon is classified as 15th. So for Esteban, he's got 1 2 out of 10, two 3s, two 4s, 1 5, three 6s, 1 7, three 8s, and 1 9. And I think for Ocon, because then there's not much between Ocon and Gasly. I think Ocon has had higher highs than Gasly, but also lower lows. You think about Monaco, where he's absolutely sent it up the inside on his teammate and thrown away a decent chance of scoring points, because I think they were in with a shout of that 10th, 11th place. So they were definitely competing for points, and to do it sort of at just before the tunnel section, wasn't it? That he sent it up the inside, ruined his race, took a big chunk out of Gasly's car as well. But then again, he has had some good performances. He was the first point scorer for Alpine at Miami, and then most recently had a very, very good performance at Belgium, finishing in eighth place. So that's where Esteban Ocon is. But again, I think what we said for Gasly is very applicable here, and I think it's more down to the car than down to the driver's performance.
Yeah. You mentioned Monaco there. It's the reason why Esteban Ocon has been dropped by Alpine. I think you do say he's had lower lows than Pierre Gasly, but I just think it's down to his decision making. I think at times Esteban Ocon's decision making isn't there, isn't to that top level where you're expecting a driver of his caliber because he's been in F1 for numerous amount of seasons now. For a driver of his experience, he should know a lot better than not to do that in Monaco and kind of not allowed his teammate and himself to score a decent amount of points in a race where overtaking is very, very difficult. But yeah, it's similarly to Pierre Gasly. I think it's down to the car more than to the driver, and it kind of shows with the two drivers being in the second half of a 10 and not in the top half of the 10. We predicted them ahead of the season to have a very good season, and we've seen where that's kind of taken us so far this season. So it is hard for them. It was extremely hard for them. But I think if Alpine are in it to win it and in it to kind of gain more points and more sponsorship money ahead of 2025, they kind of need to beat Haas and they need to beat Racing Bulls to be in with a shot of gaining that extra prize money. And I think it will be down to upgrades to propel them up higher. But Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon, it's subpar. But it's not down to them. It's down to the car more.
And then moving on to 14th place, the man tied with Esteban Ocon, and I don't think this will be any shocks. I think if anything, will be a shock how high it is Sergio Perez. So for Sergio, he's got two 1 out of 10s, two 4s, two 5s, one 6, two 7s, two 8s, two 9s. So it's almost Noah's Ark here. He's going 2 by 2. And for Sergio, I am surprised he's this high. But if you look at his early season form, the first 6 races, he's got an 8.5, a 9, a 6.5, 9, 7.5, 8. So he did have a good start to the season. Obviously, he got 4 podiums in the first 6 races as well before his form slumped off as it did last season after Miami. So maybe it's something about the post-Miami hangover or something, which doesn't agree with Checo. But yeah, it's not been a good enough season. There's been constant speculation about his future. I don't see him keeping that seat at Red Bull next season, particularly if Red Bull do finish third or below in the Constructors' Championship, which could happen. They're only sort of 60 odd points ahead of Ferrari, who are third at the minute. And in much better form, both drivers. You've got the McLarens and the Ferraris, who I think could easily beat Red Bull because they've got two drivers competing against one. But for Sergio, it's a shame to see because obviously he's been in the sport for a long time. But I just think Red Bull have to make a big, big call at the end of the season.
With Sergio Perez, I just don't think he's cutthroat enough to be part of Red Bull Racing anymore. I think it's similar down to the decision making. I think him and Esteban Ocon are two drivers that have been in the sport for a long time, but I think sometimes when it comes to their decision making, it's just not there. You can even go back to a similar race with Perez in Monaco where he had that incident with Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hulkenberg as he was trying to overtake him. But yeah, it's very. I don't think it's harsh. I think it's just very sad to see that Sergio Perez has kind of fallen so far down because if we were talking about him like this, you're expecting him to drive for potentially a Haas or an Alpine or even a Williams. But him to be driving a Red Bull and performing so badly, I think there are likely to be changes there, and Sergio Perez is likely to be out of the sport or down in a lower field in a lower team next season. But yeah, it's certainly not the best first half of the seasons for Sergio Perez. His form slowly picked up, but it's going to have to be a hell of a lot better if he's still wanting a seat at Red Bull or even a seat in F1 as a whole next season.
Yeah, I think the thing with Sergio is that we've always said, if he can get his qualifying form under wraps, then he might have a chance because particularly last season he'd be getting knocked out in Q1, Q2, but still recovering to sort of fourth or fifth. This season, is been largely the same. But you look at Spa, for example, qualifying on the front row of the grid, finished down in what seventh in the end. That was only because George Russell had that disqualification. So, I don't know about Sergio. I think it doesn't help that he's in such a high profile car in that Red Bull, but yeah, it's not been good enough. Moving on to 13th place with a 5.79 is Alexander Albon. So Alex Albon has won 3 out of 10, 3 fours, 3 fives, 5 sixes, an 8 and a 9. So the 8 and the 9 come in at Monaco and then Silverstone, respectively. His 2 point scoring finishes of the season. It's been a bit of a quiet campaign for Alex. I think maybe it's the Williams not being as good as last season, but this time a year ago, everybody had him in his top 5 drivers for drivers of the season, and now he's down all the way down in 13th.
Another driver that's kind of surprised me with how low point scoring he's had so far this season. It is Alex Albon because last season he had close to 30 points. That's for the full season. And this season after the first half of the season, well, the first 14 sets of races, he's only got 2 points finishes, and maybe it's not worrying. Maybe it's a sign of the Williams car just needing a little bit more of fine tuning rather than the driver, as we've said for Alpine and for Sauber drivers. Um, but to say that he's managed 2 points finishes, I think is a testament to his driving ability and a testament to his kind of character of how he's able to kind of propel that car into points. Sometimes it can be lucky. Sometimes you need a few retirements and you can finish him with points. But Alex Albon had a fantastic qualifying in Monaco and then got himself into the points. And then in Silverstone, he did very well as well to get himself into the points. So it's a quiet one for him so far this season. He's another one of them drivers where he's expected to have a better second half of the season and to prepare to especially propel himself up the championship order. With that as well, he's obviously going to have Carlos Sainz with him next season as a driver parent. So he's obviously going to want to try his best to kind of match Carlos Sainz's level. But for so far and right now, Alex Albon is very quiet, and we're just waiting for that tiger to kind of unleash itself out of his cage. And I think that moment might come in the second half of the season.
Up next in 12th place, creeping towards the top 10 positions, is Daniel Ricciardo with a 6.04, so about 0.25 of a rating higher than Alex Albon. So Daniel Ricciardo has 3 fours, 3 fives, 3 sixes, 3 sevens, and 2 8 out of 10s. Those 2 8 out of 10s come in at Canada and then Austria as well. It was a bit of a slow start to the season for Daniel Ricciardo. He was sort of outclassed in those first opening five or so races by Yuki Tsunoda. Since then, his form has picked up and he's been at more of a comparable rate. But I think this is the problem: is that he hasn't done enough to earn that Red Bull seat. And obviously, the Red Bull setup are in a position where they want Liam Lawson in the RB for next season. So it comes to the question whether they take the punt and promote Daniel Ricciardo or whether he's not done enough and won't be kept on. I think it's a big last 10 races of the season for Daniel Ricciardo in terms of his Formula One career. Because again, I think if he loses that seat, he doesn't have any options. There's no more options for him in F1, which would be sad to see. Because again, he's been in the sport over a decade. He's delivered some fantastic race wins. And we all know there's a driver in there somewhere. It's just about unlocking that and that coming to the forefront.
Yeah, these last 10 races, like you say, are definitely make or break for Daniel Ricciardo because, like you mentioned, he had a very slow start to the season and then he started to pick up some points, especially with that tremendous sprint race in Miami, springing to mind. But yeah, there's been a couple of conversations regarding the Red Bull system with Daniel Ricciardo, Lauren Mekies, Christian Horner. Everybody's been kind of having a conversation regarding Daniel Ricciardo's future. I just think it's down to him and whether he can perform better than Yuki Tsunoda in the second half of the season and get more of those points finishes because I don't think without those points finishes, I think Daniel Ricciardo's career in Formula One is finished. I think he needs at least a couple of points finishes in the second half of the season to have a chance of stepping up to Red Bull. I think it's a little bit of an injustice for Yuki Tsunoda, but he's obviously signed for RB for next season, so I don't think he's likely to step up into Red Bull. But I think for Daniel Ricciardo, at least let's say at least 4 or 5 points finishes out of those last 10 races. Probably 50% of those need to be points finishes. Otherwise, it's make or break. Daniel Ricciardo could be out of F1 and it could be bye bye and retirement forever.
And slightly edging out Daniel Ricciardo to 11th place is Kevin Magnussen. So 6.04 for Ricciardo, 6.07 for Magnussen, and just missing out on the top 10. For Magnussen, we've got two 3 out of 10s, two 4 out of 10s, one 5 out of 10, three 7s, one 8, and two 9s. The two 9s come in at Saudi Arabia when he was the complete Minister of Defence, and then at Austria as well where he secured a good eighth place finish. I think the problem with K-Mag is that he's not necessarily performed poorly. I think it's Nico Hulkenberg has performed exceptionally well. Because if we're just looking at Nico Hulkenberg's results, who we'll get to in a moment, but from the 14 races, there's only three races that he's finished below 11th. And for K-Mag, for the Haas, which has been there weren't very many expectations on him. That level of driving from Hulkenberg has really done Kevin Magnussen dirty and maybe exemplify the gap a little bit more. But Kevin Magnussen is 11th place, and I think that is on merit because I think he's performed well. It looks like this is going to be his last season of Formula One, which is a shame. But it's been a good season from Kevin Magnussen, I'd say. I think he's performed to a good standard.
Yeah, I think the Danish Minister of Defence will be happy with himself so far this season. Like we said, he's had very good performances. But he's also had up and down performances. But I think his best performances are highlighted by his defending abilities. A little bit dirty at times, but I think that kind of shows the character and the ability of Kevin Magnussen. But his kind of determination to do the best for the team. Like we mentioned, likely to be his final season in F1, but I don't think he's doing himself any injustice with his performances in the first half of the season so far.
And now moving on into the top 10 and scraping into the top 10 is Fernando Alonso with an average rating of 6.22. So for Alonso, says 1 2 out of 10, 1 3, 3 5s, 3 6s, 2 7s, and 4 8s. He's not really hit the heights that he did last season. He's got 4 8s. 3 of those came in the first 5 races. He's only got one since, which was in Canada. Where arguably he should have got higher considering he did finish up in 6th place. But I think for that Aston Martin, it's really dropped off in performance this season. And maybe Alonso's head has dropped slightly. He doesn't still have that same motivation. But, 2 8th place finishes in the last 3 races. So maybe there's a slight return to form there. Obviously, there's been a bit of drama with team orders and not necessarily reciprocating the generosity that Alonso has shown. But moving forwards, I think it's been a difficult campaign for Alonso. He obviously needs a car where it's competing on a regular basis, but he doesn't seem to quite have that. But yeah, unfortunate for Alonso, but he is in the top 10 and on merit as well. He's got 0.15 of a rating above Kevin Magnussen, who was actually in the top 10 for much of the early season.
Yeah, Fernando Alonso, another driver who's kind of had a bit of an up and down season, but I think that's purely down to the basis of the Aston Martin not performing to its high quality that it once had. But he's kind of been in and around our average ratings top 10, and he's kind of finally popped himself back into contention in the top 10. And he's stuck in there for the last couple of races. Yeah, a little bit of a return to form. Potentially, we could say that there's been a little bit of a dispute at Aston Martin, but Fernando Alonso quickly squashed that and said he doesn't mind. Whoever scores a point scores a point. It's for the good of a team. So Fernando Alonso, team player. Absolute legend, and I think that if he has a very good second half of the season, he will definitely propel himself higher up in this top 10.
And then in ninth place is Yuki Tsunoda with a 6.29, so only 0.07 above Fernando Alonso. And for Yuki, he has one 3 out of 10, three fours, three fives, three sevens, two 8 out of 10s, one 9, and one 10 out of 10 performance. So the first driver on this list, going in reverse order, who has got a 10 out of 10 performance, and that was obviously for Australia, where he finished all the way up in seventh, got RB's first points of the season. And I think it's been a very, very good season so far for Tsunoda. He's performed to a very high level and very consistent level, you have to say as well. There's been the odd race here and there where he has slipped back. But I think that, he is on merit deserving of that Red Bull seat. If Perez decides to go, it just doesn't seem like the big bosses fancy him as a Red Bull driver, which is a shame for him. But he's performed to a very high level all season, and I would like to see him in that Red Bull to see what he can do in a race winning car.
Yuki Tsunoda, another driver who's kind of performed a lot better than what the car is giving him. I mean, the RB was labelled to be the B Tech Red Bull from, I believe, from 2023. So yeah, it goes without saying that Yuki Tsunoda has outscored Daniel Ricciardo, who is the more experienced of the two. And it kind of was not expected for Yuki Tsunoda to be doing that because Daniel Ricciardo came into the team midway through the season in 2023, and then in 2024 he was supposed to hit the ground running, and we've not seen Daniel Ricciardo really do that. So Yuki Tsunoda, another driver who's had a very good first half of the season, like you said. Whether he can replicate that in the second half of the season, who knows? But I think if he does replicate that, there's definitely going to be a lot of teams keeping him on his radar for potentially a seat higher up in the order. Whether that's Red Bull, I don't know, but maybe potentially an Aston Martin could be thrown in there to kind of have a Yuki Tsunoda in there because I think he deserves a seat higher up the field. He's a driver that's capable of delivering points finishes, and we've seen that so far this season.
Moving on now to eighth place man. Now, just for context, so there is 1.04 rating between ninth place and eighth place. So 6.29 for Yuki Tsunoda. Eighth place is on 7.32. There is 1.04 between eighth place and first. So you can kind of get the idea. These eight are sort of in a league of their own. And coming in at eighth place is Nico Hulkenberg. So for Nico, he's got one 3 out of 10, one 4, two sixes, four sevens, two eights, two nines, two tens. Those two tens obviously being the back-to-back sixth place finishes at Austria and at Silverstone. And now he's had a fantastic season. I mean, I alluded to it earlier. So out of the 14 races, there are four races he's finished below 11th. And one of that was a DNF. That was at Monaco when he was the unfortunate third party in the incident between Magnussen and Perez. But apart from that, there is unbelievable consistency. His qualifying is just as good as last season. It's just now the Haas is not absolutely shredding its tires, and you can see that from his performances. So he's 11th in the Drivers' Championship, 2 points behind Stroll. So a fantastic season so far from Hulkenberg, and it disproves this myth about he hasn't got a podium because his performance has just been so good.
Yeah, regarding Nico Hulkenberg, he's a very good driver and very deserved of a place in the top eight. I believe at one stage we were looking at the two Haas's being in the top five, both of them. I mean, since then they've had a little bit of a drop off, but Nico Hulkenberg's performances have definitely not dropped off, which have kept him inside that top 10. Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that you've mentioned there. Nico Hulkenberg kind of qualifying performances have been fantastic. He's just able to kind of get on top of a race car and kind of pull in some good race results. That's what we said ahead of this season. If Haas are able to replicate their qualifying performances and not lose as many positions in the races, we could see him finishing in the points week in, week out. And pretty much that is the sort of pattern that is happening. Maybe on an odd occasion they've not been in the points, but Nico Hulkenberg especially is more in the points than he is out of the points. So it's a tremendous achievement for him so far this season. We know that he's off to Sauber in 2025, which is a little bit of a step down, but for Nico Hulkenberg, I reckon if he can get on top of that Sauber, get have the team upgrade it with the right resources and the right know-how, maybe that Sauber could be propelled up the championship order ahead of Audi's kind of debut in 26. But for Nico Hulkenberg, it's been a very, very good first half of the season so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. Moving on to seventh place man, and a little bit of a jump up to 7.54. And it's Charles Leclerc in with a 7.54. So he's got one out of 10, which I think dragged him down a fair bit and cost him sixth place in particular, maybe even more. He's got a 4 out of 10, a 5 out of 10, two sevens, three eights, five nines, and one 10 out of 10. So that 10 out of 10 is obviously at Monaco, his home race, where he got his win this season. The 1 out of 10 for Canada, where he had a bit of a shocker. And it was since Monaco that his form has really dropped. He's picked up in the last couple of races at Hungary and Belgium, getting a 9 and a 9.5 respectively. But then the four races between Monaco and Hungary, he got a 1.5, a 7.5, a 5, and a 4. So that's really hurt his grade this season. But other than that, it's been a fantastic season. He's been so consistent. Other that brief spell which we mentioned, he's got one, two, three, four, five, six podiums this season, which again is a fantastic effort. He's been right up there, and he deserves to be third place in the Drivers' Championship. I think when we work out the grades, there's so little to choose between fourth and seventh. When it's come to getting the average, those couple of poor performances have let him down.
Perfectly summed up right there, I think. Yeah, with Charles Leclerc, it has been those four performances in Canada and in the other races where it has kind of hurt him. But then again, he has been a lot more consistent than he was last season. I think after 2022, when he was in that championship battle, I think his head kind of dropped a little bit lower than it should have, due to the nature of what happened. And kind of, I think it was his first ever real championship battle that he was in. So a lot of inexperience obviously showed. And then in 23, I think Carlos was that inch a little bit better than Charles Leclerc. And then I think in 24, he's kind of switched it on again. But with Charles Leclerc, obviously a couple of podiums, that home race victory finally in around the streets of Monte Carlo. So he has had a consistent season. With that being said, I think that 1 out of 10 in Canada has hurt him and has hampered him from being within the top five of the average driver ratings. But so far so good for the Ferrari man.
Moving up just 0.03, so on a 7.57 average rating, is Lewis Hamilton in sixth place. So he's got 4 out of 10, four sixes, three sevens, two eights, two nines, two tens. Obviously, the two tens are for Silverstone and for Spa, where he got those wins. And like Leclerc, it's that early season form this time, which has let Hamilton down. So to start the season, he got 6, a 6.5, a 4, a 6, with some really poor performances with that Mercedes, where he's finished 3 of the first 5 races, finished ninth, and a DNF in there as well at Australia. So a really disappointing start to the season, which has cost him. And I think that's the reason why you see the difference between Russell and Hamilton, despite actually Hamilton leading Russell in the Drivers' Championship. But sixth place, I think that's probably a fair reflection overall of Lewis Hamilton's season. But his recent form has been unbelievable. His last 5 is a 9, an 8, a 10, a 9, and a 10. So just fantastic from him. And I think that there's no reason why, come the end of the season, he can't be knocking on the door of third or fourth. There isn't much of a disparity between the positions, like I said, between about third and seventh, eighth. So a very impressive season. Obviously, the 2 wins to speak of, which were fantastic and massive, massive wins. But yeah, it's a great effort. And hopefully in the second half of the season, there's a few more wins. up his sleeve.
Shall we say one race win because the other race win was kind of handed to him, as a lot of people were slating me on Facebook and the old X, because I mean I obviously put down as the headline that Lewis Hamilton obviously a two-time race winner, and a lot of people did not like that. They disagreed with me a lot because that race win, don't get me wrong, George Russell did win it on track, but Lewis Hamilton was kind of gifted it because of George Russell's disqualification. So make of it what you will. I'm going to sit on the fence and talk about Lewis Hamilton's good first half of the season because it has been really good. Like you say, those two race wins, those two 10 out of 10 ratings have come from those two race wins, I believe, which were in Silverstone and the aforementioned Belgium Grand Prix. So it has been good. There's been a couple of podiums in there as well. So Lewis Hamilton, I reckon, could be another person to kind of keep an eye on, especially with his form after the last five or so races. He's really picked it up. He's really turned it on. And I reckon he's kind of brought it a little bit to George Russell because George Russell was kind of straying away a little bit in the Mercedes head to head, but now Lewis Hamilton has found some determination, some fire in the belly out of nowhere, and he's put it on. He's lit the gas cooker, and hopefully he can serve as a nice roast dinner ahead of a second half of the season.
Right, internet going there. Well, cut that bit out. Yeah, the one thing I'll say about Lewis Hamilton's win in Belgium, because it was a win, because he has the first place trophy, was that George Russell equally deserved that win. It was a fantastic drive to make the one-stop strategy work was unbelievable. We said this in the post-race podcast. Lewis Hamilton equally deserved that win because he dominated it from start to finish. There was nobody else. It was only being undermined by his own team that cost him the win on track. No fault of Russell's. Russell drove a fantastic race. So did Hamilton. They both deserved it. At the end of the day, the regulations are the regulations. There's no debating it. Russell's car was illegal. How much it impacted the result? Who knows? Who knows? I doubt it impacted it much at all. But let's be honest, Lewis Hamilton is a two-time race winner this season, and to say anything else is delusion. Anyway, fifth place, Carlos Sainz, jumping up to a 7.81. And Sainz has a 3 out of 10, a 6 out of 10, 4 sevens, 2 eights, 3 nines, and 2 10s. The 2 10s come in his first two races of the season in Bahrain and Australia. Obviously missed Saudi. And he had a very, very strong start to the season, getting a third place in Bahrain, where the Red Bull looked unstoppable, and then obviously getting that win in Australia through Max Verstappen's DNF. It's been a very, very good season for Carlos Sainz. The only spot on his record, if you like, was that 3 out of 10 he got in Canada, when neither one of the Ferraris done well at all. They underperformed and, they double DNF'd in the end because of it. But overall, a very, very strong season for Sainz. And, it baffles me. You look at these 14 races so far, 13 for Sainz. It baffles me that he's going to be in a Williams next season because he deserves to be in a top car. And I can't fathom it that you've got a seat open at Red Bull, you've got a seat open at Mercedes, and Sainz hasn't been in the consideration for either.
Well, unfortunately, I think Sainz waited a little bit too long, and I think the Mercedes seat and the Red Bull seats are kind of near enough confirmed with conversations had with both parties and with drivers. But on about Carlos Sainz, yeah, he's had another consistent season for Ferrari. I think he's not been as good in point scoring as Charles Leclerc has, let's say. But I think when Charles Leclerc had that little bit of a blip, Carlos Sainz was always there to kind of mop up the pieces. So with that being said, I think I agree with you that Carlos Sainz shouldn't be in a Williams, but I think that maybe he's looking at it on a long-term standpoint, like Alex Albon has so far, when he joined Williams from the Red Bull family. But with that being said, Carlos Sainz, he's always been consistent wherever he's gone, and he's having yet another consistent season. Whether he can continue that and kind of beat Charles Leclerc in the Drivers' Championship. It's yet to be known, but if he does, then I think Ferrari and other teams will be on high alert when it comes to Carlos Sainz ahead of 26 and 27 because that driver, multiple race winner, and definitely deserves a top seat, not a seat at Williams. No disrespect to Williams, but Carlos Sainz's stature and his ability and potential still reaching. I think he's in it, about to approach his 30s, or it might even be 30. Not quite sure. But yeah, he's still got his best yet to come, and he's without a doubt deserved of a good seat. But so far, again, it's similar to Charles Leclerc. So far, so good. And the Ferrari are not far away from the Constructors' Championship. And what if Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc can work together a little bit better and get those point scoring runs going? They could really be a consistent challenger for the Constructors' Championship this season.
Moving on now to fourth place man and jumping up from 7.81 for Carlos Sainz to 7.86. So like Hamilton Leclerc, it's very close. And this time it's between the other two Mercedes and Ferrari drivers because George Russell is in fourth. So for Russell, his lowest grade is a 6 out of 10. That is unbelievable. I don't think any other driver has such a has a higher lowest grade. So there's a couple of drivers to come who have the same, but for Russell, his lowest grade being a 6 out of 10 is the joint best of anyone on the grid, and that just shows his consistency this season. But like I said, 2 6 out of 10s, 5 7s, 4 8s, 2 9s, and 1 10. Obviously, the 10 was not at his win in Austria. He got a 9.5 for there. We disagreed with that one. I think I gave him a 10, you gave him a 9. His 10 out of 10 is actually for Belgium, where again, he deserved to win, like I said, for Hamilton. He deserved that win. But, because of things that were beyond his control, outside of his input, he unfortunately had that taken away for him. But again, he has been brilliant this season. He is in the head-to-head stats, despite being behind Hamilton in the championship, his head-to-head stats are actually better. He's beaten Hamilton in qualifying and in the race. It's just Hamilton has had possibly higher highs, whereas Russell has been very, very consistent. I think he's one of the only drivers not to finish outside the points in a race this season. Obviously, he's had a couple of DNFs and the disqualification, but in terms of an actual race finish, he hasn't finished outside the points. And like I said, he's been fantastic all year long. And I'm sure it fills Mercedes with confidence to know, although Hamilton is moving on, they have got somebody there that can lead the team forward for years to come.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more because George Russell has all but done it. He started off at Williams, he deservedly got a seat in Mercedes, and now he is the man chosen to lead Mercedes forward in 2025. But for this season, I don't think you can really separate anybody in this top 10 of our average drivers rating. Well, maybe let's narrow it down to the top 8 because I think Yuki Tsunoda and Fernando Alonso fall short of that quota. But certainly the top 8, everybody's had a very consistent season. Everybody in their own right has had a very good season, and George Russell falls into that category once again. Could have been a multiple race winner if it wasn't for that disqualification in Belgium. Instead, it was gifted to Lewis Hamilton. And yeah, everybody in this top 8 deserves to be in this top 8 because of the season that they're having, respectively. Like George Russell, he's beaten Lewis Hamilton in the qualifying head to head. He's beaten him in the race head to head. And if it wasn't for Lewis Hamilton's kind of resurgence in the last couple of weeks, we could have seen George Russell beating him comprehensively. And on the other hand, it's not comprehensively because Lewis Hamilton has kind of brought it back once again. But George Russell continues to show why he's such a fantastic driver and why Mercedes kind of treasure him a lot and why he is going to be the man that takes him forward into 2025 because, yeah, again, a very, very consistent performer and a very, very good season so far from him.
And onto the podium. So third place man is Oscar Piastri. So he has an average rating of an 8.07. So a little jump up of about 0.21 from Russell to Piastri. So Piastri has got 2 6 out of 10s, 3 7s, 4 8s, 4 9s, and 1 10. Obviously, the 10 out of 10 being his race victory in Hungary. And, Piastri is an unbelievable talent. I think that like I said many times, in my opinion, he is a multiple future world champion. I reckon he has the potential to win many world championships. Because he's only about not even 40 races into his Formula One career. He has taken the fight to Norris this season. It hasn't always come off for him, of course, but I think he is starting to get the sort of the flaws to his to the areas of his driving under control. So the sort of the tire management side, which has been a weakness of his, he's starting to get that under control. You look at Hungary, how well he managed it there and controlled the pace from the front, the for the whole sort of two-thirds of the race. And then in Belgium as well, I thought he was the um, lead McLaren, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him on the top set of the podium at least a couple more times before the end of the season. I think he has the potential, and he is only 32 points behind his teammate in the championship. So all this talk about I go back to it. Can Norris challenge Verstappen? Can Piastri actually beat Norris over the course of the season? And what a marker that would set down if he can. We'll have to wait and see whether that happens. But yeah, like I said, I've been thoroughly impressed with Piastri this season.
I don't think we have to wait and see personally. I think if Lando Norris has similar races to what he did in Belgium, I think we could be seeing Oscar Piastri overtake him within the space of two or three races. But with that being said, I think Oscar Piastri, don't get me wrong, he's a race winner. He's a sprint race winner. But I still think that he is a little bit raw. I think that yes, most definitely, he's getting his time management under control. He's getting his racecraft under control. I just think there may be a sign of weakness coming from Oscar Piastri. With that being said, Oscar Piastri was driving most of the half of this season with a broken rib. If anybody's seen his Instagram or his Twitter, he was driving with a broken rib for most of this half of the season. So that's having that's being able to heal up, and obviously it's having its um, ever needed rest. But I do think that Oscar Piastri can bring it to Lando Norris, and could he potentially upset Max Verstappen? Because, like we say, Red Bull, I don't, they're not definitely not the quickest car anymore, and we're seeing that Max Verstappen effect. But could Oscar Piastri out of nowhere bring it to Max Verstappen? That's another question that's on my mind. Can Oscar Piastri out of nowhere bring it to Max Verstappen and potentially close the gap in the championship? Because if Lando Norris can't, Oscar Piastri certainly can.
On to second place man now, and jumping up by 0.18 to 8.25 is Lando Norris. Now, I do have to say we have criticised Norris. Oh, I specifically have criticised Norris a lot over the last few weeks, but he's got an 8.25 average rating for a reason. He has been very, very good this season. It is just that final cutting edge that's cost him. So I think an 8.25 probably actually it perfectly reflects his season, because he has been very, very good. He's taken his driving to a new level. He's been in a fight for wins on a consistent basis. He just hasn't had that last little bit to get him over the line and to beat a driver of Max Verstappen's quality. There has been mistakes still from him, but I think overall this season it reflects his where he's driving at. Second in the championship, McLaren fighting for the constructors. It reflects the level which Norris is at the minute. Whether he can compete with a driver like Verstappen over the course of the season, it remains to be seen. Obviously, Verstappen had a big, big head start. Obviously, won five of the first seven races. Um, and that was all he already had. And, we got to remember in this first four or five races, McLaren didn't have the same car that they have now. They probably had the third quickest car behind even the Ferraris. So you've got to say Verstappen did have a head start, and McLaren were always chasing in that sense. So whether he can take it to him next season remains to be seen. But overall, he's very much deserving of second place in this driver rating.
Once again, we have a McLaren driver who's in P2 and not in P1. I mean, um, between Norris and Verstappen, like you say, there was that little bit of a head start from Verstappen, which kind of propelled him into the top spot in the average driver ratings. But ever since McLaren have become even better and better, the two drivers in the papaya cars have really brought it to Max Verstappen. But yeah, there is that lack of, like you said, that lack of cutting edge from Lando Norris. I mean, we obviously had that incident between him and Oscar Piastri, which could have resulted in Lando Norris P1 finish. Instead, he gave it away to Oscar Piastri. And there's been a couple of other instances where he's just lacked that. Like Austria, I think he could have been in the distance away from Max Verstappen if he just waited patiently and just got the overtaking nailed on rather than took a bit of a risk and took it into turn three, I believe it was, into turn three, turn four at Austria. And that's what's kind of brought him down to second place and not first in the driver ratings. But regardless of that, he's having a tremendous season. P2 in the championship, P2 in the average driver ratings, and it's a deserved P2 because he's raised his game, but it's just lacking that, like you said, that lacking that cutting edge, lacking that race winning ability, which should have seen him win a lot more races than just the one that he's got so far.
I forgot to do the breakdown of Norris's results. So he's got 1 6 out of 10, 3 7, sorry, 5 8s, 4 9s, and 1 10 out of 10. The only 10 out of 10 he's got is for Miami. But that does mean that Max Verstappen is sat at the top with an 8.36 driver average. And I'm actually surprised it's that low. I would have thought it would be sort of pushing towards 9 out of 10 for Verstappen because I think by far he's been the best driver this season. Um, you know, you continue to see there is levels to the drivers, even though Verstappen hasn't had the quickest car since Miami, or since before Miami even. There has only been two races since where, including Miami, where he has lost ground to Norris in the championship, and Norris has been his closest competitor. So obviously Miami, and then the only other occasion was Hungary that he's lost ground in the championship to Norris, which is superb. So for Verstappen, he's got 1 4 out of 10, which was from Monaco. 3 6s, then 2 8s, 4 9s, and 4 10s. So it just goes to show the level of consistency he is brought, and he is much, much deserving of that first place.
All that needs to be said here is the Max Verstappen effect is well and truly in play. That's all that needs to be said because the car doesn't need to be perfect. It's the driver that is literally driving the wheels off the car, which in Max Verstappen's kind of terminology is him shouting at Giampiero Lambiase about the car, and then on the race day delivering an absolutely fantastic performance. So with this first half of the season, he's well and truly in a league of his own. Well, not quite literally, but in terms of the championship, yes. In terms of his driver ratings, probably not. Because we've seen a couple of very good performances from the two McLaren guys, but Max Verstappen is well and truly on his way for another world championship, and it's yet to be seen whether he remains at Red Bull for the foreseeable future, and whether he kind of bows out of the sport at Red Bull as an eight-time world champion. But he's certainly on course for his fourth. It's just whether that Red Bull car has any more upgrades that can help him to deliver that fourth world championship and kind of give him a little bit of a bigger buffer heading into the crucial end part of a season.
But that is all for our 1 to 10 driver ratings. We will be back at the end of the season to review them as an overall for the entire season, and see how it changes. But thank you all for listening, and we will see you in the next episode. Goodbye.